رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين وبشر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أن لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار كلما رزقوا منها من ثمرة رزقا قالوا هذا الذي رزقنا من قبل وأتوا به متشابها ولهم فيها أزواج مطهرة وهم فيها خالدون صدق الله العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, before we get started, we are very blessed to have our dear teacher, Sheikh Ali al-Bakri, one of my long-standing teachers, and he is here with a very special announcement, so I'll let him make that, and then inshallah we'll get started. So, Sheikh Ali.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As Allah says in the Quran, Allah guides whom He pleases, and whenever He wants, however He wants. You can be on your vacation, coming from Germany to have a good time in California, and instead of finding dunya, you can find Allah. And that's the story of our sister, Yanina. She actually came here from Germany to have a good time, but through companionship and fellowship and the right set of friends, she found Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she wants to announce her shahada in front of you right now. Takbir, takbir, takbir. So I would like Sister Yanina, please come forward. And you can hold this mic, inshallah. And repeat after me, mashallah. And her friends are there, they're crying. You're about to say, and I hope you understand my English, I bear witness that there is no God but one God, Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his prophet and messenger, his final prophet and messenger, because we believe in Moses, Jesus, all the prophets. And once you say that, you become a Muslim, you start reading the Quran, your book of guidance, you start modeling your life based on the life of the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his family and his companions. You start living a new life. This moment is a very special moment in your life. We believe that Allah's gift to you, if you choose Allah, Allah's gift to you, that you have a clean record. All of your past is wiped out, which means you are like a child all over again. Clean slate, no sins, all the mistakes are forgiven. So this is a push for you and a welcoming gift for you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also have a welcoming gift from you from the committee here. There is a new Muslim committee at MCA. We also have a new Muslim committee at Tawasaw. So inshallah, you're going to have a combined gift, prayer rugs, books, things like that, some hijab provided from this center and from our organization. So inshallah, without a further ado, so I would like you to repeat after me. But I want to say, how do you say your name?
Yanina.
Can you speak in the mic?
My name is Yanina.
And
Oh
what's
my
the last
God. The last name?
Yes.
Ruinis.
Venus.
Yeah.
Very good. And Yanina, why? What's bringing you to Islam? Why?
Because my dad is from Iraq,
Uh-huh.
Mosul. Yes,
Uh-huh.
my mom is Spain,
Uh-huh.
and yes, and my roots is the yes.
So her dad is originally from Mosul, Iraq, and her mom is from Spain, and probably the grandparents of her mom were also Muslims when Muslims ruled Spain. So she's coming back to her roots. Did you read about Islam?
Yes, I try it every.
You tried
Yes,
prayers,
yes,
you tried
yes,
fasting,
yes.
you
I
tried
will-
this,
I
and
learn
how
it.
do you feel?
Nice.
You feel
I
nice.
feel peace,
Peace,
and happiness,
happiness,
and love.
love, mashallah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So, alhamdulillah means thank God, thank
Yeah.
God, thank God. So, now that we benefited from your journey, you can put the mic closer to you, and you say after me, Ashhadu
Ashhadu
an la
an la
ilaha
ilaha
illa
illa
Allah
Allah
wa ashhadu
wa ashhadu
anna
anna
Muhammadan
Muhammadan
Rasulullah.
Rasulullah.
Takbir. 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 You repeat after me also in English to affirm. I bear witness.
I bear witness.
I bear
Witness.
that there is no God.
Yes.
That there is no God
But there is no God
but Allah.
but Allah.
And I bear witness
And
I
I
bear
bear witness
that
that
Muhammad
Muhammad
is his final
is his final
prophet
prophet
and messenger.
and messenger.
Takbir. 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 MashaAllah. Welcome to our community. All of these are your sisters. All of these are your brothers. Anything you need, please tell us. Inshallah, you go back to Germany. You'll come back every year. We will host you. We'll take care of you. And welcome to Islam. Welcome to a Muslim. MashaAllah. Congratulations. MashaAllah. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So please, you can give me the
Oh yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. Allah bless you. MashaAllah.
Allahu Akbar, 3 shahadas today. May Allah increase our community in shahadas and guide the people of this country and the world to Islam. Amen. Khair. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. Tonight's talk is going to be related to a subject. If you have children, it'll be very, I think, near and dear to your heart. And if you're aspiring to have children, something to keep in mind. Because as we'll learn today, a lot about raising children of faith has to do with what we do very, very, very early in their life. When I say early, I mean their infancy. And I'll just begin with maybe something that's a little bit scary before we get into something more exciting and positive. And this is just a trend to show you in America, in this country, how fast we have come from a society that used to believe in organized religion. So this chart is showing us from the 70s all the way until about the early 90s, the vast majority of Americans, about 95%, 93%, said they ascribe to some religion, typically Christianity, right? Judaism, Islam, and of course a few others. But something strange has been happening in this country over the last couple of decades, pretty much since the early 90s, where you see this linear increase to today, we're 2023, about 1 in 4 Americans says they don't believe in any organized religion. Now, if you're like me, and you were raised in this country, what we were always told by our parents was this is not us. This is those other Americans. These are not our trends. We don't have the problems that they have. What we're finding in our research at Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research and many other places is that unfortunately, about 1 in 5 children who are raised as Muslim will grow up and not identify as Muslims in adulthood. Now, alhamdulillah, we had 3 shahadas today, which actually tells us why Islam is still a continuous growing religion in this country. We lose a fair amount of people in this country, but then we keep replenishing them with those who come to Islam, and of course with immigration. But I want us to really set the stage to recognize that the issues of religious doubt, the issues of apostasy, the issues of just leaving your faith even silently are something our communities cannot ignore. Something that our communities have been dealing with, but very under the table essentially. So today what I hope to speak about quite a bit is trying to unpack from the research that we have done, how is it that we raise kids who have proper conviction in this faith of ours, who have yaqeen in their belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who love this faith, and who choose to practice Islam into adulthood. And I say choose to because in this society we live in, we can only control our kids for so long, and then you let them go at some point in their life, and they will choose whether they want to keep what you have taught them or they want to abandon it. And typically this happens in adolescence, early adulthood. And so this is the challenge of parents. It's not, can you keep your kids Muslim until they're 18 years old? It's, have you laid the seeds of Iman that will sprout when they're adults? And I want to start with this image just to kind of tell you how I want to approach the topic today. Because I want to deal with one particular issue that I believe is really at the core of a lot of religious problems that our youth are having today. I want to ask, anyone know what this image is? Space? Yes? Anyone know where it came from? Yeah? Black hole? Close, not quite, but it's the forming of a galaxy. This is an image from the James Webb Telescope. It came out about a year ago. Okay? Now, why I bring up this image? If you look in the sky, you cannot see this. This is only an image that is available to us because of the infrared telescope. It captures a wave of light our eyes cannot see. But what's fascinating is that now that that veil has been uncovered for us, we can look at that and we can marvel at these images and say, for a Muslim, subhanallah, how amazing is the Creator, how majestic is the Creator. And this is, of course, still a very crude approximation of what the reality is. This is just capturing one wave of light, right? But it got me thinking when I saw these images, and kind of part of how I weaved my story about this topic, that this existed whether we saw it or not. It was not dependent on our eyesight and our senses for this to be a truth. But when we saw it, it changed our belief towards it. It changed our emotions towards it. And we became more excited, enthralled, and wondering about the wonders of this universe. What are black holes? I have a 13-year-old daughter. Every day she wants to read about black holes these days, right? Right? It's the way that the science is coming out, the imagery, the videos, right? The technology. And she wants to understand something that we cannot see. And so my question that I want to speak about tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, is that we don't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly with our eyesight. We see His signs, of course, and we see His manifestations, all kinds of things. We don't have direct eyesight with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we know He's there. But here's the fascinating thing. Before I showed you these pictures, if I asked a kid, draw for me what a galaxy looks like, draw for me what a black hole looks like, draw for me and the scientific phenomena that are out there, what are your drawings? How close will your drawings be to reality? Very, very far, right? You might remember if you're a kid, you tried to draw a galaxy, it probably didn't look anything like this or like this, right? So the question I want to come up with today, or really pose and us think deeply about, that every single one of us in this room, young and old, male and female, immigrant, not immigrant, mixed, educated, this level, that level, we all have a perception in our mind of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Just like before you saw these images, you probably, if I asked you, what do you think space looks like, something is coming into your mind. Now, why do you have an image of space when you never saw that which was in space? It's because somehow, some way, through culture, through reading, through information, you're told, hey, there's these things out there that look like this, look like that. You saw a science fiction movie, you saw a comic book, and somehow you create in your mind some physical image of what that universe might look like. But my question today, again, is you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, but how do you imagine Him to be? And I don't mean physically. I mean how do you imagine His attributes to be? How do you imagine his essence to be? And every single one of you has an answer. Every single one of you in this room. And the thesis of my talk today is essentially that the inaccuracy of that image is one of the core reasons that Muslims in the world and youth in the world and non-Muslims suffer from religious doubts and even leaving the faith. I'll show you this. Should be a message here somewhere. Give me a second. Skip this a little bit. No, should be pointing here. Okay. I want to show you this tweet. Some of you might have heard about it. It was about, a year and a half ago. There was a Muslim brother. He sent a tweet to Elon Musk. And he's praising Elon, and he's telling him, Elon, you're very intelligent, you're very bright, and have you thought about your afterlife, right? I want you to pay attention to Elon's response. He said, so again, this is a Muslim trying to give dawah to Elon Musk. So Elon says, thank you for the blessing, but I'm okay with going to hell if that is indeed my destination, since the vast majority of all humans ever born will be there. Now, why do I focus on this message of a random person? It's because I believe that Mr. Musk has the audacity to say out loud what many people in the world believe in their hearts. What many Muslim youth believe in their hearts. What many non-Muslim youth believe in their hearts, which is, I imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so difficult to please that what's the point in trying? Now, what does that lead to? Let's make it more explicit. So I teach in the university. Imagine I told you all, please take my class. It is the best class you will ever take in your life. You will be so wise and smart and understand the world in different ways. And you're like, yeah, great, sign me up. But I said, there's a catch. I fail 99% of my students. Who wants to take my class now? But I said it's the best class. Right? It'll make you smart. It'll make you like just amazing. But why don't you want to take it? That fear, what's the point of working so hard for something that I will not even show success in? I want us to use this as like a leverage to think about, or an anchor, why so many people in the world and so many youth have struggles with their faith. A lot of it comes down to the question of they do not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. See if I have the quote. I'll put the ayah is not on the screen. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says 3 times the exact same verse. He says, مَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدَرِهِ or وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدَرِهِ 3 times. He says, they, meaning human beings, have not estimated Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the proper estimation. Meaning human beings have not evaluated or judged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that He should be evaluated. Meaning you have, O humanity, fundamentally misunderstood the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the benevolence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the attributes of Allah. And so because of that misunderstanding, you have a lot of issues in your life. Remember, these ayat are coming to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to tell the companions, to the people of Quraysh. I want to hammer this over and over until no one is lost with what I'm saying. A story, how the Sahaba witnessed this come to life. The battle of Al-Ahzab, the battle of Khandaq. The Muslims are 3,000 in Medina, fortified, and they see 10,000 enemies coming to attack them. The Quran describes this in chapter 33, Surah Al-Ahzab. But what's fascinating is in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala usually focuses His attention when He's speaking about incidents in the seerah, not about what happened. You don't hear about the 10,000 or the 3,000. You don't hear about the names of the people. You don't hear about the location. What you hear about is what was going on in the minds of people on the battlefield. That's just a Quranic method that Allah goes through. In Battle of Badr, Uhud, Khandaq, in Surah Al-Hashr, when Allah talks about Bani Qurayza, it's all over the place, the inner workings of the people there. And Allah uncovering how they see the world based on how they see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does He tell us? He tells us there's 2 groups of Muslims in the Muslim army He wants to give us some insight into. One of them, He says, وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ before that, and when those people who were weak in faith and the hypocrites saw the army coming, they said, مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. وَإِذْ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. So imagine in the Muslim army, there are hypocrites and those people weak in faith. They see 10,000 people coming and they respond saying, Allah and His Messenger have lied to us. Allah and His Messenger have deluded us. And Allah leaves it at that and talks about them a little bit. The next page, almost literally the next page, the same almost line on the page, Allah tells us the exact opposite. وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ قَالُوا هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا. And when the believers, firm in faith, saw the army coming, they said, Allah and His Messenger have surely spoken the truth. And that increased them in their conviction and in their submission. If you read the verse, you should probably be scratching your head. I don't get it. Two people saw the exact same thing. Imagine you're in battle and you're standing. Next to you is a hypocrite. Next to you is someone weak in faith. And the next to you maybe is a Sahabi with firm iman. They're seeing 10,000 people and they're believing and they're internalizing the exact opposite. One is saying Allah and His Messenger lied. One is saying Allah and His Messenger spoke the truth. Where does this come from? Why did those people weak in faith have a doubt? And why did those who have conviction, right, see the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this? My dear brothers and sisters, much of our life will revolve around the assumptions that we hold about who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He is. And like I said, it is something that you are going to fill in the gaps every day. You go to school, you go to work, you interact with your spouse, you interact with your coworkers, you're doing different things, you're getting, making money, you're losing money, you're getting healthy, you're losing your health. And we breathe in these experiences, we inhale life experiences, but we are meaning-making creatures. We like to make sense out of what's happening to us. So if you did poorly on an exam, you probably are going to say something along the lines of, maybe I need to study harder. Or you might say, the teacher had it out to get me. But you're probably not going to say, it was just random, right? There has to, because we don't like that. We want to know that there's a meaning behind what happens. Or you got a really good job of your dreams. You're probably going to say, I got this job because I've worked really hard. And I got this job, right, because of, the network that I have and so on and so forth. And you're going to find worldly examples that explain why this happened. And the same thing happens if bad things happen. You might get sick, you might lose your job, and now you say, why did I get sick? Why did I lose my job? Well, again, it could be someone is out to get you, or it could be, maybe Allah's punishing. Maybe God is mad at me. But the point is, that reasoning, you are filling in. There's no revelation that's going to come to you and tell you this is why this happened to you and this is why that happened to you. But this is what the Sahaba did every single day. And the people in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, they're filling in those gaps. And we are doing that every day. So this is what we call an image of God, right? Again, not a physical image, right? It's an imagination of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want to speak today about how this develops in the hearts of our youngsters and what we can do as parents to ensure that we nurture the proper image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and prevent or rehabilitate a wrong understanding of who He is. And the Quran gives us, by the way, some examples about this. Some typologies that are out there. There are some people out there who, when they think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they might think about Allah metaphorically like a magic genie. What do I mean by that? And this is a very American way of thinking about religion, which is, and someone actually came to me today after the Jummah, a question that he asked out of the blue. He said, I heard from somebody, right, that if you read Quran and you pray, then Allah will give you a good job and a good wife and this and good this and this. So he said, okay, how do we think about this, right? And Allah described this actually in the Quran, right? He said, and now why am I saying magic genie, right? A magic genie is a sense of entitlement that, I ask and I get. And so I said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, I'm praying. Now, Allah, it's your turn to fulfill your end of the bargain. As the Quran describes this, Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ عَلَى حَرْفٍ. There are people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like they're on the edge of a cliff. Right? If you've ever hiked and you're on the edge of a cliff, it's scary. Why is it scary? Because as beautiful as it is to hike on that cliff, one step and you can fall off. So Allah is describing their faith as being so on the edge. They could fall off that cliff of iman if they're not careful. So what does Allah say? In asabahu khayrun اطمأن به. When good happens to this person, he is at peace. And you meet these people, you say, how are you doing, brother? Alhamdulillah, Allah, I got a promotion. Alhamdulillah, I had a child. I was able, something good happened. And they're so happy, Allah is so good to me, and I'm just so happy to be a Muslim. Then Allah continues. But what happens when asabatu fitna? But when a trial hits him, a tribulation hits him, Allah says, انقلب على وجهه خسر الدنيا والآخرة وذلك هو الخسران المبين. But when he's hit with a calamity, he falls back on his heels, losing not only in this life, but losing in the afterlife. And that is the ultimate loss. Meaning, people who believe that, you know what? Well, no, God didn't give me. So I'm mad at God. And I'm angry at Allah. And I don't want to give God what he wants now because he didn't fulfill his end of the bargain. And this, again, you have to ask, why does this happen? It happens because there's a false image of who he was. This was, well, Allah, you said pray, and you said fast, and I did it, and now you didn't give me what I want to do, so I'm not going to do what you asked me to do. Right? This is a deviation, a distortion in understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he is. Second distortion, and by the way, be mindful, many, many parents say this to their kids as a way to motivate them. If you work hard and you study hard, right, and you read Quran, then all these good things will happen to you, right? And it's just this, the kid internalizes, okay, I do A, B, and C, Allah gives me X, Y, and Z. And when it doesn't happen, now they come back rightfully and say, that's not true. So Allah didn't give me a multi-millionaire, I'm not a multi-millionaire, didn't give me a wonderful husband or a wife, right? So you don't want to do this. The second thing that is very common that we find, about 15% of people that we study, it was about 2,000 North American Muslims in the studies we've done, look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of like this. Sorry. Which is a cosmic police officer. What does that mean? I like to drive very fast. It's just a disclaimer, right? I have a need for speed. So as I'm driving, I am constantly scanning to see if there's police around. Because I know that if I'm going 80 and the speed limit is 65 and I get, I don't want to get a ticket, right? So what happens to you all when you're driving, even if you're going the speed limit, and a cop is behind you? Anyone get anxiety? Anyone get paranoid? They're like, what could I have done? Would I miss a stop sign back there? Is my tail light out? Is this that? Maybe it's because I have a hijab. Maybe it's because I'm brown. Something is going through your head, right? Nobody sees a police officer, most likely, and is like, oh, thank God, he's here, right? I'm safe. He's going to get the other guys who speed. No. That anxiety and that fear and that paranoia, they kick in. Now imagine, and now a police is not bad. He's not inherently bad. His job is to enforce rules. You speed, he gives you a ticket, right? You break another law, he holds you accountable, right? So on and so forth, or a judge. But be mindful, and we teach our children very young. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-hakim. Right? He's the judge. He's the one who has a right to make rules. Allah lahul khalq wal amr. Right? He can create whatever he wants. Things and commands. He tells you to pray, tells you to wear hijab, tells you to do this, tells you to do that. That's fine. But if that is the only perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a kid is absorbing, they will come to view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like this cosmic cop. Everything in life for them is like, well, what is Allah going to pull me over for, essentially? What is he going to get me on, right? And this, again, unhealthy, possibly mild level of anxiety with this is okay. You should be cautious. Say, hey, I don't want to overstep the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not to the extent where it's like you view the Quran and you view Islam and you view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as nothing more than this is a bunch of rules that if I don't follow, I'm punished for. That was kind of like the Elon Musk example, right? The rules are hard. And if I mess up, which is very likely, then I'm doomed. So these are some typologies we find, this cosmic cop, this magic genie, this entitlement. And I want to come back to our focusing our efforts. What do we do as parents, aunts, uncles, socializers, brothers and sisters to inculcate in our youth a healthy understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is? And what we find is that one of the primary shapers of how your kids will understand Allah is how they understand you as a human being. What do I mean by that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razaq, right? He is Al-Khaliq. right? And all these attributes, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى, all the glorious names belong to Allah. But his rizq doesn't come directly from him into your stomach, or from him, right, into giving you a paycheck. There's intermediaries Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. So in this case, the parents are the first mechanisms through which the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are transmitted to the child. So Allah is Al-Wadud, He's the loving. But a child cannot understand the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts the love, His love for the creation in the hearts of the parents as well. And this is why parents love their kids. A mom who is exhausted, staying up at night, odd hours, waking up every other hour, she loves doing this for her kid, even though it's exhausting at times. Yes, mothers? It's tiring, but you're grateful. I have 4 children. I'm tired taking care of them. Will you take my 4 children and stay up with them all night long? How many of you are going to volunteer? Right? No, they're not yours. You don't have the love of my child to make that sacrifice that, okay, I'm going to quit my job, get up every other hour, feed them, change their diaper, do all these things. It's a special love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to you for your kid that they absorb. And the same thing with the rizq, right? Whether it be the breast milk or anything else. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed the human being in this way. The child is abstract. Abstract thinking doesn't exist. They understand the concrete. They understand what you do to them. And so the children will absorb what we're finding more and more, even with our research, is that the way they view their parents is oftentimes their default understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we'll often do is we'll give these children in adolescents and adults these surveys, ask them about their parents, their relationship with their parents, if their parents are kind, harsh, cruel, you fill in the blank. We'll ask them about their views of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is Allah, and they're very different questions. How merciful do you perceive Allah? How kind do you perceive Him? How loving do you perceive Him? How forgiving do you perceive Him? And we find a pretty robust correlation that the more a kid views his parents negatively, the more they view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala negatively. The more a child views their parents benevolently, the more they're going to view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benevolently. And now, that's a little intuitive, but I want us to think about how this happens. Because again, right now I'm focusing not on doubt. I'm talking about instilling a conviction that will be able to overcome the doubts that will hit them, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I want us to reflect over how subtle things we do shape our children's understanding of who Allah is. Think about when the name of Allah is invoked in your house. For some parents, they have a routine. Their kid does something wrong, broke a glass, did something inappropriate, got a bad grade, and you hear, Wallahi. What happens after Wallahi? Good or bad? Bad? Yeah. You might get hit, yelled at, screamed at, punished, so on and so forth. Right? This is just one way I want us to be very aware of how subtle our behaviors, where kids are making this association between what am I hearing? So when my mom or dad invokes the name of God, what else comes with it? What adjectives come with it? What emotions are coming with that? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Is it anger? Is it frustration? You figure that out. And if they hear every time the name of Allah is being mentioned, or the majority of the time the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being invoked by the mother and the father, that something bad is happening. Unconsciously, they make that connection. That they're primed. When they hear the name of God, something negative. It's not that complicated. It happens every day in everything. If I say the word ice cream to you, how many of you have a good feeling in your heart? How many of you are like, ice cream, you start dreaming about ice cream, what flavor ice cream, mango, pistachio, whatever it is, you like cotton candy, right? Because you tasted ice cream, and every time you licked the ice cream, it was good. So reinforced year after year after year, you think of ice cream, you think of something sweet. What if I gave an infant every day, I say, you know what, to my baby, I don't want him to eat ice cream. So I'm going to give him like masala ice cream every day. It's like chicken tikka masala flavor ice cream, right? He licks it, he's like, oh, gross. Then I give it to him the next day. It's like, gross. Okay, nahari flavor, or like, you come up with the grossest flavors you can imagine, right? And then I tell him when he's 10, son, would you like ice cream? What feeling is he going to have in his heart? What experiences are he's going to draw from to be like, don't even say the word ice cream around me, right? And it's easy to laugh about ice cream. But it's a serious thing to understand that what we do every single day, thousands of times we will do this, is we'll say the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that accompanied with a smile or a frown? Is it because you're motivating your kid? You know, son, you need to pray. Allah loves those who pray. Or you need to pray because Allah hates those who don't pray. It's very subtle. And I'm not saying that you can never ever say anything that talks about Allah holding you accountable. That's not what we're saying here at all. But I'm saying the dosage is really important. You are shaping in your kid's mind every single day. Is my Lord one who I want to draw near to? And I consider him to be my wali, my intimate, loving caretaker, who everything he tells me to do is because he cares for me? Or is it he has given me this rule, and if I don't follow it, I don't know why the rule exists, but I'm going to be in big trouble for this. Look at the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and how he was trying to shape this. He talked about, Man aada li waliyan faqad adantuhu bil harb. Whoever opposes an intimate servant of mine, and I have declared war on him. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ. Hadith Qudsi. He says that my servant does not draw nearer to me with anything greater than the things I have imposed on him. And the hadith goes on to the end, but I want to focus on this. To realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He is imposing obligations on you, He's doing that because He loves you, and He subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to create this loving bond between creator and creation. And He knows the way for this to occur is through these behaviors. Ibn Ata'illah, he comments on this, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is almost like He's obligating Jannah on us. So if you do the obligations, you're going to get paradise. So Allah wanted us to get Jannah, and He's saying, and He gave us these obligations, and that obligation is a way to loving Him. But the point I want to come back to here is that the obligations that Allah has given us are things He's done to facilitate love. And it's a very different framework than the cosmic cop. Right? And so for our children to be aware of this language all the time. In the Quran, if you look at the amount of times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, in Allah yuhibbul, and you fill in the blank. Allah loves those who do X, Y, and Z. Love is a very powerful motivator. The desire to be near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a very powerful motivator. And fear also has its place. But as Ibn al-Qayyim, he talks about, he said, fear can spur and maybe ignite at times. But he says that it is love and hope that sustains and drives motivation. And this is something that parents have to think about because it's counterintuitive in many ways. I have children, and I know that right now, if I told my kid, right now, said, get up and go and read the Quran. Kid might be like, I'm not in the mood, maybe later, right? Come on, go and read Quran. Allah loves it if you read Quran. Okay, maybe I'll do it later, right? But if I yell and I scream, they're going to get up and they're going to go and read the Quran, right? Fear works to get the behavior in the moment. If you're a teacher, you know that. If you're a parent, you know that, right? Threats and punishments are very effective for in-the-moment obedience. But here's the problem. It's very, very short-sighted because it only works while you are in control of this person. Once this entity grows beyond you and outside of your clutches, that is not going to sustain that behavior any longer. What will sustain the behavior is that this is an act that my parents have inculcated with me and I have positive vibes around it. This is something that I have learned, even though it was parents have to play the long game. It's not going to be immediate. You're going to have to deal with a lot of just not doing what you need them to do. But through time, through this method, if you look in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how many times does He use His names of benevolence as an example? How people often talk about al-khawf and raja, right? We should have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should have hope and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they often talk about it like a 50-50. Two wings of a bird, right? Open, that are 50-50 bound. This is not how the Quran actually talks about the subject at all. It's not how the Prophet Muhammad spoke about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Would you like it if I asked your children, tell me about your father, tell me about your mother? They're like, half the time she's really vengeful and half the time she's really nice. So what do you mean? Seems like they have a disorder, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And I'm trying to make it as real as I can, but this is not how Allah describes Himself. In the Quran, how many times He uses His name of Rahman, Rahim, and Ghafoor? They're in the hundreds of times. And how many times He talks about His attributes that hold people accountable? It's there, and we cannot ignore it, and we need it to hold us in line at times. But that dosage is what really, really is important. And the Prophet Muhammad is coming to the companions over and over again to fix their own distortions, because they came with baggage. Just like many of us have come with baggage from our home cultures or whatever, our American culture and society and TV shows and Marvel movies. By the way, it's fascinating. Kids here, raise your hand, watch Marvel movies, right? Some of you, or adults, right? The Marvel movies in the last decade have been very strategic about who the villain is. And the villain is very often like a supernatural deity. And that supernatural deity usually is evil and has ulterior motives. Now again, you might be watching the movie and your kids are watching the movie, and they're not thinking about their own God this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the human mind doesn't differentiate very well. So if you see 10 movies, and every time in the movie, the villain is godlike, you will absorb. And the Sahaba as well absorbed from Jahiliyyah this perception of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was. So the Prophet had to come along, alayhi salatu wasalam, and always tell his companions stories about the man who killed 99 people, right? And then he killed the 100. But then, he found the scholar, and the scholar told him to go to another land. We tell this story, but sometimes we forget. I mean, the key point of the lesson, the Prophet is saying, yes, there's forgiveness, but look at the vastness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's benevolence, right? And His forgiveness. And it's not a one-off story, it's the story of the prostitute, right? You'd say the worst of people in society, right? And feeds a dog. Through the feeding of a dog, she's forgiven. Again, what do people miss? Who sent this dog to this lady? Did the dog randomly appear? Or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perhaps know this woman had a soft spot for an animal and knew that she was really, really off the right path and was looking for an excuse to try and do something she could do to forgive her? Said, you know what, you love animals. Here is a dog. And she's merciful to get some water and she gives it to the dog and Allah forgives her for her sins, right? Or the man who had committed so many sins that he told his children to burn him and spread his ashes everywhere. And when Allah resurrects him on the Day of Judgment, says, why did you do this? And he says, oh, I know I did so many terrible things. I did this so that you couldn't hold me accountable. And Allah says, is acknowledging the fear this person had of Allah. He says, bear witness that you have been forgiven. So the Prophet ﷺ was really working hard to rehabilitate this understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts of the companions. The second thing I want to say, I know as our time is, how much do we are? You have till 9, and then Q&A? 20 minutes. How did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ do this? It wasn't through lecturing alone. The truth of the matter is lecturing only talks to one part of who we are. We've all heard Allah is merciful. We've all heard Allah is near. We've all heard Allah is loving. But do we internalize it? Is a very different phenomenon. Our life experiences are what lead to internalization. If you experience His mercy, it's way different than hearing that He is merciful. And so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his job as rahmatan lil alameen was to fill in for a lot of those traumatic experiences that people had in life that led them to having an unhealthy understanding of Allah and to rehabilitate that through the bond He would create with people. I'll give some examples. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in the hadith that we hear about him, people often are taught the words of the hadith. There's a good example is at the end of salah, the Prophet taught us to say, Allahumma a'inni ala. Many of you know the dua. But do you know the story behind the dua? Why? How did this get transmitted to us? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ comes to a young Sahabi, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, and he tells him, "O Mu'adh, indeed I love you." And Mu'adh mentions that he grabbed his hand first. So the Prophet is grabbing his hand, right, out of love, telling him, "I love you," and then saying, so don't forget to say at the end of every prayer, Allahumma inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Now Mu'adh ibn Jabal then went to his students and said, this is called Hadith Musalsal, right? It's this chain of narrations. He would hold them by the hand and say, "Indeed, I love you." And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, and he would tell them the hadith. And this went on and on and on and on. Now, I'm highlighting this because there's a big difference between being told something, just kind of matter of fact, and it being told something in an intimate bond. They are not the same. They are so fundamentally different, which is why you hear 1,000 lectures about Islam, and you hear the khutbah, and then 2 hours later, you have no idea what it was about. Because it was just this abstract information. It doesn't mean we don't do that, but it means you need much more of that human bond. That's why the teacher-to-student experience is so central in Islam. It is so essential in Islam. You cannot learn Islam through YouTube. You cannot learn Islam just through books. You need to have other human beings who show you the prophetic character and manifest the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us. It's called being Rabbani, right? Takhallaq bi asma'illah. We embody those attributes of Allah to show the creation that if this is just the little that we can do as human beings, how much can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have of this attribute? So you think about the rahmah of the Prophet. Imagine a man, he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How was he modeling it? Sahabi comes in a halaqah. It's Ramadan. Ya Rasulullah, and destroyed. So what happened? I broke my fast, right? With his wife, intimacy. So the Prophet said, okay, can you free a slave? See, Ya Rasulullah, I have no money, I can't free a slave. It's okay, can you fast for 2 consecutive months? It's like, I can't fast for 2 months, that's too difficult. The Prophet said, okay, sit down. And he's, the gathering is going on, and a man comes, and he donates to the Prophet Muhammad a big basket of dates. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, where's that man? And the man gets up. He goes, can you take this basket of dates and give it to the poor people? Ya Rasulullah, I don't know anyone in Medina who's more poor than I am. Right? Think about this. He came with a problem. The Prophet said, do A, I can't do it. Do B, I can't do it. Okay, here's the answer. Go and do it. No, I can't. The Prophet said, you know what? Take the dates and feed your family. And he smiled. Right? Think and understand how he's changing the perceptions in the minds of their companions. That if the Prophet, who is conveying on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has this type of benevolence, has this type of love and easygoing nature, how is my Lord? Tabaraka wa ta'ala. And these stories are abundant. We could probably speak about these for hours. The famous story I'll stop on this point on was the famous incident that happened on the day of Eid. The Prophet ﷺ is on a camel, and people are coming to him after the salah, men and women asking questions. After the salah, Eid salah, there's a big line. Everyone wants to give salam to the imam. They're all standing there waiting to give salam to the Prophet ﷺ and to ask him different questions. Of course, they're coming from tribes. They see the Prophet only once every now and then. So while this is happening, and during this, his cousin, Al-Fadl ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, is sitting behind him on the camel. And he's a great companion who washed the Prophet ﷺ, shrouded him, and buried him. A young woman comes to ask the Prophet a question, ﷺ, and she is beautiful. And it captures the attention and the gaze of Al-Fadl. And he is fixated on the beauty of this young sister. If you saw this today, if you're a parent and you saw your son doing this, or you saw it in the masjid and a boy looking at a girl this way, what might you do? What phrases might come out, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he's modeling for us, right? He's talking to the sister, and he's aware that Al-Fadl is looking at her, so he just turns his hand, grabs his cheek, and just tilts it a little bit to the side. So he's looking directly at her, he turns it a little bit. That's it, right? It's over, right? There's no astaghfirullah, haram. Yes, does he not know that that is not the appropriate behavior? He didn't need to know that it's haram. He knows that it's haram. He knows it's not right, right? And so the Prophet is speaking to his heart, right? The Prophet is speaking to his soul. Imagine that boy, young man, he came to the Prophet ﷺ again, same thing. Ya Rasulullah, allow me to commit zina. Right? It's a real story. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, allow me to have a girlfriend who I can have a relationship with. And now you can imagine, astaghfirullah, the messenger of Allah, right? The Prophet ﷺ, one step at a time, right? Imagine the companions are there and like how they're feeling, like, how dare you ask such a question, right? The Prophet is so gentle. Do you have a mom? Yes. Would you like people to do that to your mom? No. Right? Do you have an aunt? No. Would you like people to do it to your aunt? No. And he goes through like 7 or 8, female relatives that he had until the man says, Ya Rasulullah, I don't want to do this, right? Ya Rasulullah, I don't want to do this. But it's this, this quality of that interaction that is changing how the companions relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now we're going to come all the way back to our topic in the last few minutes about dealing with these doubts. The strongest way to repel doubts from settling in the hearts of our youth is building a foundation of conviction. That's the way to do it. And we talked about God image here and shaping them to understand Allah in the proper way. But here's the other reality. Doubts are inevitable parts of the human experience. The companions had doubts about their faith. And I'll explain what I mean by that hadith. Because this is the nature of how our minds work. Our minds get all kinds of random information every single day. And the most random thoughts might take you somewhere for a minute. And the companions, they came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and asked these things. Just to give you an example of how the companions understood this topic. One time, 2 companions were speaking. And it was Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. And he asked him that which verse in the Quran gives you the most hope? And he told him it's the verse in Surah Al-Zumar where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Right? Oh, my servants who have transgressed upon themselves, don't despair from the mercy of Allah. But this is the most hopeful verse for me. Listen to Ibn Abbas's answer. Because my favorite verse of hope is the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Ibrahim are having a conversation. Where he says, with قَالَ Ibrahim, رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. Now, and he explains, Ibrahim is asking Allah, show me how you give life to the dead. And Allah says, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? Do you not have belief? I mean, that's kind of a strong response by Allah. Like, what, you don't believe me? Right? And Ibrahim says, بَلَا وَلَكِنْ يَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. He says, of course I do, but it's going to solidify my faith. So Ibn Abbas, he comments that this verse to me is the most hopeful verse in the Quran because Allah accepted the answer of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so the Prophet commented on this verse. He said, نَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِالشَّكِّ بِنْ إِبْرَاهِيمَ إِذْ قَالَ رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. He says, we have more right to question and ask questions than Ibrahim. Right? Ibrahim is the messenger of God. Of course, he's going to be that close to Allah. Those of us who don't have that revelation, of course, we're going to ask questions. And things are going to come into our minds. There's two types of doubts I will deal with in the few moments that we have. Number one is what the Prophet typically dealt with his companions, which is what I call soft, fleeting thoughts. And these are the things that will hit people at different points in their life. And the companions, they had these. They came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, we sometimes get these thoughts in our head that we would rather be reduced to charcoal than express these thoughts in our head. And the Prophet ﷺ said that, أَوَقَدْ وَجَدْتُمُ, that do you really, really find yourself having these thoughts? And they said, yes. And he said, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. He said, that is manifest faith. This is a very strange hadith. Someone is coming and saying, Ya Rasulullah, we get these really, really negative, unwholesome thoughts about our faith that we don't want to have. And the Prophet responds by saying, and that is clear, manifest faith. Why is he saying that? In another hadith, he comments on this, almost the same wording, where people come and say, Ya Rasulullah, we get these thoughts, we don't want to have these thoughts. And he says, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, right? Praising Allah, glorifying Him and saying, Alhamdulillahi alladhi, right? Praise be to the one who has repelled the ability of the shaitan to simply whispering in the hearts of people. Meaning shaitan indeed will come and put these random fleeting thoughts in the hearts and minds of people. What? You're going to watch a YouTube video that poses some random question that's existential and your kid may not understand it. You might get it in the college. You might get it when you're going through a tough time in life. And the Prophet ﷺ is saying, part of faith is not running with this doubt like today's kids often do. Every random thought, I'm going to send out like a message about it. I was just thinking, blah, 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 blah. There's no need to express every thought in your mind, especially if that thought is a fleeting thought. The Prophet is saying, let it dissipate on its own. Most of the time, those things will dissipate. But the lesson I want to make clear here is the Prophet ﷺ is actually praising the companions when this is happening. And this is a huge thing that youth feel terrible about, which is, I feel like a bad Muslim because I don't have the type of conviction I'm told to have. Rather than telling them it is normal to get some of these thoughts, and it's praiseworthy that you deal with them in an appropriate way. It's a very different way of thinking about this. That you cannot, this is a human experience, you cannot escape this at times. So just let it sit and let it dissipate. And then we come to the second type, which is those nagging issues. And those are of different natures. I'll separate them really fast. I said this a few months ago in the khutbah when I came here, is that sometimes we teach our kids Islam in a very black and white fashion. As if there's one answer, everything. I'll give you an example. If you're a kid in this room, tell me if you've ever heard this, anybody. Have you ever heard somebody say, every single letter in the Quran and every single harakah in the Quran, whether it be the fatha, the dhamma, and the kasra, it is exact and it is precise. And how many of you have heard that? Some of you? Okay. And what happens when your kid comes to the masjid one day, or he goes to college, and he hears there are 7 qira'at, 7 recitations, 7 types of recitations, and they have different harakat. There's Maliki Yawmuddin, there's Maliki Yawmuddin, right? There's different words in some of these, فَتَبَيَّنُوا فَتَثَبَّتُوا in Surah Al-Hujr. And this goes on and on, there's a whole science behind this. But the point I'm making is, do not make Islam seem so exact and black and white, so that when your kids get exposed to actually no, Islam is actually there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of flexibility in some of these things. There are different madhahib, right? There's different ways of recitation, there's different opinions amongst our scholars, different interpretations of these ayat, that they don't feel like they've been lied to. And that's what many youth come and they say, they felt like we've been lied to. Our parents and our teachers said that this is what Islam says and this is the absolute truth, and then I hear there's some other opinion. Now I question what else I've been told that's not true. So raising your kids with this flexibility, say, look, the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the absolute truth. But my ability and your ability to understand exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant is limited. This is the nature of human speech and the nature of divine speech even more so. So it's natural that people will have different understandings of this. And it's natural that there will be variation in our understanding of it. So when you hear something that's new, don't let it throw you right for a tailspin. So it would be fiqh opinions, right, or even hadith, right? So the key thing here is intellectual humility. Can you give your kids a dosage? Say, look, you are young, and everything is not going to make sense to you at this moment in time in your life. And that's the way every science is. You cannot understand any science as a young person in its totality. Your faith is no different, probably more so because it's more complicated. So rather than object to all these things you don't understand, can you say that this is maybe beyond my comprehension right now? I can be patient with it, or I'm willing to go and ask people of knowledge. That's the last point I want to make. Is that if your children are facing doubts about their faith that have been very strategically designed and placed in social media, there's people who do this for a living. Their job is to create doubt. And your kids see this, that you actually now have to deal with it head on. You have to actually have the ability to say, I hear your question. I'm not mad at you for having that question. Let us go and get that question addressed. And sometimes these are long processes to undo, deep-rooted doubts that have been festering for many, many years before the parents might ever be exposed to some of these things. So I want to give ample time for Q&A, so I'm going to just kind of wrap it up here. To summarize some of these key points, the take-home message is really, really work on rehabilitating our children's understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and a default to His benevolence with a healthy dose of being mindful and cautious of overstepping His limits. Because those limits that we overstep, it's not just about the harm it does to us, it's the harm it does to society. Everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do is good for us in this life, or the next life, or both. And everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids us from doing is either bad for us in this life, or the next life, or both. And as Allah says in the Quran, that there are things, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting has been prescribed upon you, and it is something you don't like. But the principle Allah is establishing, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. There are things that you will not like. There are things you will not understand that are good for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. There are things that you will love and you will want, and they are bad for you. And the key line here is وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Get your kids in a habit of understanding Allah knows what's in your best interest better than I know and you know. And Allah knows what's detrimental to you more than I know or you know. And with that healthy, positive image of Allah, that it'll be easier to defer and submit to His will, because you know that everything He tells you to do is coming from a good place. And everything He tells you not to do is coming from a place of love and care and compassion. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those who have that firm conviction in Him, see Him in the way He's supposed to be seen, and we're able to repel our doubts in the most beautiful ways. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. We have about 10 minutes, I believe, for Q&A, right? 12 minutes, okay? Yeah.
All right.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, so we'll take questions now.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, got it. Go ahead. Faddal.
So
Oh,
waste your time.
yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and answer some of the relevant questions. Doesn't seem like we have too many. Okay. I like this one. Assalamu alaikum. How do I make my kid a hafiz while I myself have memorized very minimal? Also, how do I protect him from the fitna of society? I'm going to combine that last part of the question with how do you promote obeying Allah so your kid doesn't be in that 20% of adults who aren't going to end up being Muslim.
Jazakumullah khair. there's a lot of questions in there, but the first is, of course, Iman. This is tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day. We just have to have conviction. It says not do X, Y, Z, and no one can guarantee your kid's faith. There are parents who do everything right, and their kids may not be Muslim. There's parents who do everything wrong, and their kids will become tremendous Muslims. This is just the way the world works. This is part of the qadr that we have to accept. But we follow the asbab, and we do the things that we're commanded to do. The first thing I want to go back to is this question of how do I make my child a hafiz, right? And I know that this is coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of love of the Quran and a love for our children to hold that in their heart. But I want to push back a little bit on the motivation and the desire of parents and how we understand what it means to be religious or to have kids who are knowledgeable about their faith. Memorization of the Quran in the Arabic language is virtuous because the Prophet said it was virtuous. And there's tremendous hadith about its virtue that I'm not going to deny. But I want to also say that this is actually not an obligation. It is not an obligation, and we only need, it's fard kifaya. We need some hufaz in the community because it's necessary for leading salawat and for tarawih and these things. But it is an obligation that your kid knows the fundamentals of his faith that allows him to be a functional Muslim in the society. So if you have limited time with your child, hifz is not the priority. And I'm saying this to you as a parent who wants their kids to memorize and who is pushing their kids to memorize in a certain way, but also acknowledging that one of the most common things we deal with, I was telling this actually to a brother a few years ago, I counsel many families whose kids are going through hifz programs. And one of the common things I find with them is a lot of children who have resentment towards the Quran because of how they're being pushed and forced to memorize. And again, it's not about the love of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oftentimes, parents have to check their own nafs. Why do I want my kid to memorize? Is it so that I can say my kid is a hafiz? Or is it because I want my kid to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So, if you want your kid to tread a path of hifz, there's a couple of things you can do. One is, you don't have to be a hafiz, but you have to model that behavior, that you have to model that I have a relationship with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I love working with the Quran, and I'm working every day to improve in it. And your kid will pick up on that. We all want our kids to be better than us. If I'm not a doctor, I can't say my kid can never be a doctor. If I'm not good at something, my kid can never be good at it. We want our kids to be better than us. Aspire for that. Now, you have to start with that. Number two, though, be aware of your kids' predispositions and the talents Allah has given them. There are some children Allah has given a memory to, and who just find pleasure in doing something like this. And within one family, I was just speaking to a good friend of mine who's a scholar in Texas, and I asked him about his children. He said he has a 16-year-old who memorized Quran, and his other kids have half the Quran, 5 juz, 3 juz, and everyone is different. Because this kid just had a desire and a disposition that made it easy. And accept that as well, that this kid may not have that in him. I'm not saying have your, just have no dreams, but also be realistic. And you do your best to model it. But at the end of the day, what matters is that your kid is loving the Quran throughout their lifespan. It is better your kid knows 10 juz or 5 juz or 2 juz or 1 juz and loves Allah and His Messenger and loves the Quran, then he knows 10 and he is resentful towards it or she is resentful towards it. So just be very mindful about some of those things. Right? The other question is, how do we prevent our kids from becoming amongst those 20%? That comes back to the issue of doubt. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, his student Ibn al-Qayyim came to him and he asked him a very kind of heavy question. He came to him, Ibn al-Qayyim mentions, he goes, I began to take all these doubts that I had heard from people, and I presented them one after another to my teacher, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. And Ibn Taymiyyah listened to this, and then he gave him some advice. He says, listen, don't make your heart a sponge for every doubt it is exposed to, or else it'll end up absorbing some of these. Rather, make your heart like a smooth glass that sees the doubts, but they hit the glass and they bounce off. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned, he goes, this is the most beneficial advice that I've ever been given by my teacher. Now, what do I mean by that? What does he mean? There are people out there who, sadly, like I said, they're in the business of sowing doubt. So when you go online and you say, what does Islam say about X? You will see all the allegations about Islam. We don't want our kids to, their foundation of Islam to be formed through, let's come through doubt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and alleviate them. This is not a prophetic method. In fact, there's a scholar, he wrote a book about doubts in Islam. And later in his life, when he was asked about it, he said, I wish I had not written a book about addressing doubts, but actually about building conviction. So the advice that he was giving and that Ibn Taymiyyah is giving is that we want to give our kids the intellectual foundation that prepares them for whatever issues might face them in the future. And in today's world, my dear brothers and sisters, I believe a lot of the philosophies that are out there, that they're in the air, but we're not aware of. Secularism, liberalism, feminism, capitalism, the beliefs embedded in them are what our kids are breathing every day. So they're going to come with doubts typically that have to do with that. My body, my choice, right? I own this money, why can't I do what I want with it? And a lot of things to do with like the wrong idea of what the self is. Your kids need serious, serious investment on the Islamic worldview of how we see the self, right? How we see our relationship with the universe. And it's a long-winded answer, but the point I'm getting at is focus less on the memorization aspects, focus a whole lot more on these intellectual aspects, along with the suhbah. So these two things. Good companionship has always been in the history of humanity the way that ideas are transmitted. You can take somebody who is not very practicing, stick them around a lot of good practicing people, and through time, that person becomes very practicing. We are likely to mold to, as the research finds, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. One of the things that's very common. You want to know who you are, look at your 5 closest friends, and you're probably somewhere in the average of those 5 people, right? So make sure that you do everything in your power to have your children surrounded by the right quality of people. And that means social media and internet has to be discussed. Someone who's been very mindful of children's education, and I homeschool 2 of my own kids, I found a disturbing phenomena, which was where many parents who think that they are safeguarding their kids by not letting them interact with the bad kids, they actually let their kids sit in their room all day long because they think it's safe. And those kids are on YouTube watching shorts, they're on TikTok and all these things, and that is suhbah in one way or another. And they are absorbing these beliefs in ways that you have no idea. That would have been better for them to play with the neighborhood kids who will do the most random things, but it's that dosage of what they're getting online that could be the most destructive thing. So if you don't want to be in that 20%, one of the things I'll highly, highly, highly recommend, children should not have smartphones. Children should not have smartphones. And if they have phones, they should only have talk, meaning they can make phone calls, and they can send a text message. There is no data plan for children. A parent who gives their kids data is like someone who gives their infant fire and says, play with it and be safe. So most of the problems we find, even the shubuhat, the doubts that kids face, it's almost always, I saw this video on YouTube. I saw this, I saw that. That's becoming the most common way that young people are expressing doubts in their faith. So closing that door, giving them the foundation, giving them the suhbah, so when they eventually will see it, because we cannot shield them, they'll be ready for it. And also preemptively dealing with it head on, knowing in advance what are some of those key issues, and asking the masjid, and asking the sheikh, asking the people who run halaqat, can you address some of those things well before, right, they come into the psyche, right, of some of our children. So I think we're getting towards our time, right? We have another question? Oh, really fast?
So Aisha is coming in. I do have, okay, we have 3 minutes to Aisha. If I could ask one more question, I know Brother Hamza told me to end this program quick, but I feel like this is addressing a lot of the youth in the room.
Okay, I'll end it by 9:09, I promise.
Okay, what advice will you give parents who constantly nag on their kids about being perfect in this dunya and in the akhirah, and constantly have doubt in their children?
Okay, very short answer is expecting perfection out of your kids is a way to destroy their dunya and their akhirah. And our research, by the way, shows that the more that parents demand their kids excel in every aspect of life, but it's the mechanisms they use. So it's the shaming behavior that is the most dangerous. When you hold your kids to a standard, I'll give you an example. Your kid comes home with a 95 on an exam. Many parents would be like, alhamdulillah, you got an A. There are some parents who say, let's focus on the 5% you got wrong. So the child is coming looking for like some validation, some pride in the mom and dad are like, let's just talk about what you did wrong. This will destroy self-confidence, it will destroy self-esteem, and it will lead to the same thing I spoke about with Elon Musk's tweet. I can never satisfy these people, why should I even try? And again, if I can't satisfy my mom and dad, how am I going to satisfy God? So be very, very, accept that you are not perfect, accept that your kids will pave their own path, their own careers. You may not like their careers. That is their choice. You can only advise them in the most beautiful ways, but there are a million ways to be a good Muslim, and it could be in any career path, and there are a million ways to be a good Muslim. That doesn't mean that they have to memorize the full Quran or do this or do that. There are Sahaba, they were all over the place in their personalities. Khalid bin Walid knew a couple of surahs, right? There's such variability. Just let your kids find something that they want to latch onto that is acceptable to you. Right? Don't live your life vicariously through your kids. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save our children, to give them iman, to allow us to view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the most beautiful ways. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun al mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Jazakumullah khair. It's always an honor and a privilege to be here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We were wondering if you would be able to stay after Isha
sure, of course.
for Q&A.
Yeah,
If everyone can come back after Isha for an extension of the Q&A, that'd be great. Also, we have the bookstore in the back. Please do not forget to check them out. Jazakumullah khairan.